welcome to Reformed thinking. Imagine possessing the ability to completely uncreate someone.
Wow. Uncreate, that is a heavy thought.
It is, right? Not just, defeating them in a physical battle or burning down their cities, but literally wiping the memory of their existence from the fabric of reality.
Yeah, to the point where they are erased from history itself.
Exactly. Or, well, precisely that. It is a terrifying, staggering concept. Usually when we read ancient historical documents, we expect straightforward record-keeping.
Right, like an accountant's ledger of a war.
Yeah, you get the casualty numbers, you get the dates of the siege, and you file it away. But stepping into the Psalms means stepping into a landscape that challenges our modern assumptions about history.
It challenges our assumptions about literature, too.
Definitely. And it brings us face to face with the sheer, unapproachable weight of divine justice. So today we're doing a deep dive into Carl Friedrich Keil's commentary on Psalm 9.
A fantastic, albeit heavy, text to unpack.
It really is. Our mission here is to look at the stark contrast between God's absolute sovereignty as a righteous judge and, well, the shocking frailty of defiant humanity.
That contrast is basically the beating heart of this text. But to understand how we arrive at that specific tension, we first need to establish the immediate context.
Because the arrangement of these texts is far from accidental, right?
Right, absolutely. The compilers knew what they were doing. If you look at Psalm 8, it celebrated God's glorious name covering the entire earth.
A very universal, grand scope.
Yeah, very macro. Then, looking just before that, Psalm 7 ended with a specific personal promise from David to sing to the Lord's name.
Okay, so a very micro individual resolution.
Spot on. And Psalm 9 bridges these two thoughts perfectly. It picks up the melody quite literally, beginning with the declaration, "I will sing to thy name, O Most High."
So it pulls those two threads together.
It does. It takes the universal glory recognized in Psalm 8 and the personal resolution of Psalm 7 and merges them. It becomes this massive hymn praising the righteous judge following a massive defeat of hostile nations.
That sets the stage beautifully. I want to unpack this from the very top, starting with a heading that has, it has baffled readers for centuries.
You were talking about the musical inscription, I assume?
I am. The strange musical inscription of Psalm 9. The text includes the Hebrew phrase, Muth Laban.
Ah, yes. Muth Laban.
For anyone reading this in a standard English translation, it usually just sits there in the heading.
Untranslated, usually.
Yeah, untranslated or maybe dropped into a tiny footnote at the bottom of the page. And to a modern reader, it feels like a secret code.
It really does read like some sort of ancient cipher.
So why do we trip over this so much? And how have scholars historically tried to crack it?
Well, scholars have bent over backward trying to decode it because they often assume every single word in an ancient religious text must hold some hidden theological or historical key.
Right, like there can't be any mundane instructions.
Precisely. Keil outlines a whole list of these historical guesses, and they are wildly diverse. Take the Septuagint, for instance.
That is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, right?
Correct. Completed a couple of centuries before Christ. The translators looked at Muth Laban and translated it into Greek as Secrets of the Sun.
Secrets of the Sun. Which sounds incredibly mysterious and, I don't know, almost prophetic.
It sounds like a hidden theological doctrine, right? Like you are about to read a mystery.
Yeah, it sets a very specific mystical tone.
But then you have Martin Luther, fast-forwarding to the Reformation, who took a completely different approach.
What did Luther do with it?
He translated it as beautiful youth or lily-white youth.
Oh, wow. That is a massive pivot from Secrets of the Sun.
It is a totally different vibe, and it doesn't stop there. Then you look at the Targum.
The spoken paraphrase used in the ancient synagogues, right?
Yeah, the Aramaic paraphrase. They assumed it referred to the famous duelist Goliath.
Wait, Goliath. How do you get Goliath out of Muth Laban?
Well, they interpreted the Hebrew as a reference to the man who stood in the space between the two armies, the champion.
That is quite a creative leap.
It gets better. Meanwhile, some of the later rabbis linked it to the death of Nabal.
From the story of David and Abigail.
That is the one. Basically, they rearranged the Hebrew letters of Laban to spell Nabal.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, turning it into an elaborate anagram.
I have to push back on this academic tendency.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like historians and theologians have a terrible habit of overcomplicating simple, practical instructions.
It is an occupational hazard for academics, I suppose.
To me, this is akin to finding modern sheet music that says at the top, to the tune of Greensleeves.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
And then having scholars 3 millennia from now passionately debating the historical identity of Mr. Greensleeves.
That is a great analogy.
You would have academics writing entire dissertations trying to figure out if Greensleeves was a legendary agricultural figure or, a political metaphor for the environment.
Or a secret code for an ancient king.
Yeah. They do all that rather than recognizing it as just a familiar, catchy melody used to carry new lyrics.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. And it is basically what Keil says. He dismisses all of those historical guesses from the Septuagint to Luther to the rabbis as curious conceits.
Curious conceits. That is a polite academic way of saying they are overthinking it.
Absolutely. The primary error all these brilliant minds made was the assumption that the inscription dictates the content of the psalm itself.
And Keil says it doesn't.
Keil argues that it does no such thing. It simply indicates the tune.
Just the tune.
Yeah. It was likely a very popular song of the day, perhaps titled "Dying is to the Sun" or "Death Makes White."
So just a local folk song or something?
Most likely. The ancient musician borrowed the air of that familiar song because the congregation would immediately know how to sing it. It is entirely practical.
Which gives you, the listener, something fascinating to consider. Think about how often we miss the practical, straightforward meaning of historical texts because we are hunting for hidden codes.
We love a good conspiracy, or at least a puzzle.
We do. We want a mystery to solve. We want to find the secret cipher. But sometimes the text is just a practical instruction to the choir director saying, hey, sing this to that tune everyone knows.
Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one.
Right. But if we pivot from the musical heading to the actual structure of the text, things get incredibly intricate.
Oh, the structure is fascinating.
Psalm 9 and the one immediately following it, Psalm 10, are acrostic poems.
Yes.
They're alphabetical, built letter by letter.
Yes, and this structural choice has generated massive controversy among textual critics.
Really? Why is an acrostic controversial?
Well, some of these critics look at the alphabetical arrangement and argue that this level of rigid structure represents a later, degraded period of literature. Yeah, they call it poetic trifling. The assumption is that early, raw, authentic poetry from a figure like David would never be constrained by something as mechanical as starting each stanza with consecutive letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
They view structure as the enemy of authentic emotion.
That is precisely it.
That feels like a very modern, almost romanticized view of art. The idea that real art has to be spontaneous and chaotic, and that rules ruin the creativity.
It is a very modern bias, and Keil refutes it thoroughly. He points out that even highly skeptical critics, like Hitzig, are forced by the linguistic evidence to admit that Psalms 9 and 10 were genuinely written by David.
So you can't just write it off as a later addition.
No, you can't. The acrostic form is not proof of a late degraded era. Keil brings in examples from other ancient cultures to dismantle this assumption completely.
What kind of examples?
Well, he mentions the Roman poet Ennius, who composed in acrostics long before the decline of Rome, during what we might call its Iron Age of robust creativity.
Okay, so it was a respected form early on.
Exactly. Furthermore, the oldest Germanic epics used strict alliteration, where every line had to adhere to intense phonetic rules.
Right, like Beowulf and things like that.
Yes, and that was considered a highly elevated and sophisticated style, not a paltry substitute for real poetic spirit.
I love the imagery Keil uses to describe the function of this structure. He notes that for the didactic poet, the teacher, the alphabet acts as a many-celled casket, storing pearls of wisdom.
A many-celled casket. It is a beautiful phrase.
It really is. It is a set of stairs leading the pupil upward into the sanctuary of understanding.
Step by step, letter by letter.
But then, for the lyricist, the musician, he says the alphabet is like a piano keyboard.
I think that is my favorite analogy in his commentary.
By forcing the writer to move through every single letter from Aleph to Taw, the poet ensures every single key on the emotional keyboard is struck.
Yes, expressing the absolute full range of human experience without leaving anything out.
That imagery captures the dual intent beautifully.
And we have to remember the context. The alphabetical form was not an outward embellishment just to look clever on a written page.
Right. This wasn't for people silently reading books in a library.
No, this was an oral culture. The structure was a brilliant tool adapted for the common people. It made the verses accessible, allowing everyday people to memorize massive blocks of text.
So it was a memory aid.
Primarily, yes. Augustine pointed this out centuries ago. High art does not have to be chaotic or incomprehensible to the masses.
It can be perfectly structured.
Rigidly ordered even, and yet completely adapted for the mind of the everyday listener to carry with them into the fields or the marketplace.
If that structure is the vehicle, what is it actually carrying? That brings us to a transition into the text itself, examining the Aleph, Beth, and Gimel sections.
Yes, covering verses 2 through 7.
The tone shifts dramatically here.
Yeah.
David begins by praising Elyon, which translates to Most High, but he is not just tossing out a compliment.
No, the use of Elyon carries immense theological weight. Keil points out that this is not an adjective describing God. It is an attributive name in itself.
A title.
A massive title, one carrying authority going all the way back to Genesis. David is appealing to the highest possible jurisdiction because the context of this psalm is a brutal, staggering conflict.
What is the historical setting here?
Historically, the setting is likely the Syro-Ammonite War or the intense Philistine feuds.
So real bloody warfare.
Very real. David has witnessed a massive victory, and he attributes it entirely to the righteous judge who sat down on the throne to execute justice.
And Keil focuses heavily on the nature of that justice, right?
He focuses heavily on the absolute extermination of the enemies described in these verses. The language is unsparing.
Yeah, it does not pull any punches.
The judgment is so complete that the enemies are described as falling back the Latin concept of retro, meaning they are driven backward and perish entirely before God's angry face.
The text says God's angry face consumes them like fuel.
I want to stop right there because I think a lot of people listening might stumble over that idea.
It is a very harsh image for modern readers.
We are conditioned to think of divine love and mercy, but this is an intense, terrifying image of a face burning up humanity like dry wood. How does Keil reconcile this level of absolute destruction?
Keil grounds it in the ancient historical realities and the strict requirements of divine justice. He references Moses' ancient threat to completely blot out the memory of Amalek.
Okay, so total annihilation.
Yes. The judgment described in Psalm 9 is not a light reprimand or a temporary physical defeat. It is a total removal.
A wiping of the slate.
Exactly. We see this vividly in the linguistic focus of verse 7. The Hebrew phrase is zikram hema.
Zikram hema. What does that mean, literally?
Many commentators read this and think it means the conquered physical cities are abandoned and forgotten over time, like ruins in a desert.
Right, just natural historical decay. But Keil argues forcefully against that softened reading. The enemy is completely uprooted, and it is their very memory, zikram hema, the memory of them, the people themselves, that is wiped out by the righteous judge.
I want to ask you, the listener, to pause and grapple with this concept of absolute divine erasure, because it cuts entirely against the grain of our modern sensibilities.
It is deeply uncomfortable.
It is. We live in an era where we obsessively archive every single digital footprint.
Absolutely. We save everything.
We back up our photos to the cloud. We curate our social media profiles. We fear being forgotten above almost anything else.
Legacy is everything in our culture.
Yeah. So the idea of a righteous judge possessing the authority and the active will to completely blot out a legacy, leaving absolutely no trace of a defiant people in the universe, that is a stark, sobering reality. It is a total uncreation.
It forces a direct confrontation with the reality of divine justice. When the righteous judge acts against defiant, entrenched evil, the result is not a compromise. It is an effacing of their existence.
So if the enemy is completely erased, what fills the vacuum they leave behind?
That is where the text makes a massive pivot in the was strophe, found in verses 8 through 11. It provides a sweeping contrast.
Let's get into that contrast.
While the enemies are reduced to perpetual ruins, the text says Yahweh abides enthroned forever to judge the Tebel.
Let's break down that word Tebel. What is David talking about here?
Tebel refers to the fertile surface of the globe, the inhabited, cultivated earth.
So not just the dirt, but the civilized world.
Right. And Keil notes a staggering thematic shift happening right in this verse.
Right.
Up to this point, David has been celebrating a local present victory over specific hostile nations like the Philistines or Ammonites.
Right, regional skirmishes.
But suddenly, his vision expands to the anticipation of a universal final judgment.
He zooms out.
He zooms way out.
Yeah.
The local victory is treated as a harbinger, a down payment of a final reckoning where the righteous judge will evaluate the entire fertile globe in uprightness. The local battlefield dissolves into a cosmic courtroom.
And within that universal, terrifying courtroom, God provides a very specific kind of protection for his people.
Yes, he does.
The text uses two vital Hebrew words here, misgab and betzera.
Those words are incredibly descriptive, and they pair together to create a vivid physical picture. God is described as a misgab.
Misgab.
This translates literally to a high, steep place of refuge that is entirely removed from danger.
Like a fortress on a cliff.
Exactly. This is imagery David did not invent in a comfortable royal study. He lived this out.
He spent years hiding in the wilderness, right?
Yes, hiding from King Saul in the steep, rocky crags of the wilderness, desperate for a physical misgab to keep him alive.
That makes it so much more real.
Then we have the phrase, time's in trouble, which translates the single Hebrew word betzera.
What is the root of betzera?
Keil explains that betzera is derived from a root meaning to cut off. It describes a state of severe distress where every prospect of deliverance is cut off, leading to a situation of absolute restraint and motionlessness.
That linguistic connection is brilliant. Betzera describes a situation where every horizontal prospect of deliverance is completely barricaded.
Horizontal being the key word there.
Yeah. You look left, you look right, and the paths are blocked. The enemies have surrounded you, or the circumstances of life have boxed you in.
You are cut off.
When you find yourself in a position where all earthly exits are chained shut, the only direction left to look is up toward the misgab, that high, steep place of refuge.
That is a powerful way to visualize it.
Knowing God's name means trusting Him precisely when the horizontal earthly options run out.
And that specific kind of trust is what prompts the summons in the Zane strophe, covering verses 12 and 13.
Moving right along through the alphabet.
Right. The text calls for praises to Yahweh, who inhabits Zion. It demands that his deeds be proclaimed among the peoples. Keil uses the term magnalia Dei to describe these deeds.
Magnalia Dei, which means what in plain English?
It refers to the great, mighty acts of God. But Keil defines it specifically as acts that subject earthly things to heavenly energy.
Heavenly energy, that sounds very dynamic.
Very dynamic. These are not ordinary historical events. There are manifestations of divine might breaking into human history and bending earthly reality to heavenly will.
And the text identifies exactly who these deeds are acting upon, right? The afflicted.
Yes. And this is where we need to look closely at the language again, because English translations often smooth over a massive distinction,
They usually just group it all under the poor or the afflicted.
which misses the nuance. We are talking about the Hebrew words aniim and anoim. They look similar, but they operate very differently.
Break that down for us.
Keil points out that both words share the same root, ana, which means to bend or to bring low, but they describe entirely different conditions.
Okay.
Ani refers to a person who is bowed down by heavy external circumstances. It is an objective state of affliction, poverty, oppression, or physical suffering.
So an external pressure.
Yes. On the other hand, ana refers to the internal state of the heart. Humility, passiveness, and gentleness.
Wait, I need to push on this.
Go ahead.
How does one lead to the other? Because in my experience, external pressure and affliction often make people bitter, angry, and resentful.
That is very true for many people.
How does external affliction, being bowed down by circumstance, mechanically create internal gentleness and humility?
That is the crucial psychological and theological mechanic Keil unpacks here. He calls this the school of affliction.
A school of affliction.
The external pressure of being an Annie is designed by the righteous judge to strip away human self-reliance. When you are crushed by circumstances you cannot control, your illusion of autonomy shatters.
You realize you are not the captain of your own soul.
Precisely. For the defiant person, yes, this creates bitterness. But for the believer, this stripping away of self-reliance forces a total dependence on God, which produces the internal state of and true humility.
So the external crushing creates the internal softness, if received correctly.
Yes. Keil insists these twin virtues of humility and gentleness are acquired strictly in this difficult school. They do not grow wild in times of worldly prosperity and ease.
That is a hard truth to swallow.
Prosperity breeds the defiant illusion of control. It is the external bowing down by circumstance that crushes pride and produces the internal lowliness of spirit.
And it is specifically these afflicted, gentle people that the righteous judge is fiercely protecting. The text introduces a startling title for God here. The Dorish Damim, the Avenger of Blood.
That is a fierce title.
God demands a strict reckoning for unnaturally shed human blood. He hunts down the oppressors.
The contrast is intentionally jarring. The righteous judge is simultaneously the tender caretaker of the humble and the terrifying executioner of the violent.
Which exposes a massive disconnect with how modern culture views the divine.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, there is an overwhelming tendency to try and separate the God of vengeance from the God of comfort. People want the comfort, the therapy, and the gentle care, but they reject the judgment as primitive or harsh.
They want to split God into two different personas.
Right, but here, in the text, they are identical. The exact same avenger who hunts down the wicked with terrifying precision is the very same God who intimately remembers the cry of the gentle pupil in the school of affliction.
They are two sides of the same coin.
You cannot have the high stronghold of protection without the righteous judge who wipes out the oppressor.
That is the theological bedrock of the psalm. The comfort of the afflicted is entirely dependent on the judgment of the wicked. If God does not punish the wicked, he is abandoning the afflicted.
That makes total sense when you put it like that.
This brings us directly to the special contrast in the Cheth strophe, found in verses 14 through 17.
Okay, let's look at that.
Keil describes this section as a look back at the past cry of the afflicted church. We see a vivid architectural and theological contrast between two sets of gates, the gates of death and the gates of the daughter of Zion.
A tale of two gates. Lay out the geography of this for us.
The gates of death, representing Sheol, are subterranean. They are beneath the ground, leading down into the absolute, suffocating silence of the grave.
Very dark, very isolated.
In stark contrast, the gates of the daughter of Zion are elevated. They are built on a high hill. They are bustling public spaces where the community gathers, where justice is administered, and where commerce happens.
Full of life and noise.
Exactly. The logic of the text is clear. To publicly praise God before the people in the gates of Zion, the church must be snatched from the peril of death, pulled up from those subterranean gates, and kept alive.
Because there is no public praise, no witness to the nations in the silence of the grave.
Exactly right.
The mechanism of that rescue is what fascinates me. We see a total reversal in the Cheth strophe. God does not just pull the righteous up. He ensures the enemies sink into the exact net they hid for others.
The Hebrew word for net here is reshet, derived from a root meaning to catch or seize.
Reshet.
Keil points out that this figure of the net is a particular trademark of the Psalms written by David, drawn from his days as a fugitive, avoiding traps in the wilderness.
Again, drawing on his actual lived experience.
Yes. God makes himself known. The Hebrew word is noda, specifically by executing this ironic judgment.
Ironic judgment, I like that.
He does not always strike the wicked with lightning from the sky. Often, his judgment consists in letting the wicked be snared by the intricate traps they spent their lives building to harm others.
It is a perfect symmetrical justice.
It really is.
This brings us to a massive musical climax in the text. Right after the wicked are snared in their own net, we see the instruction. Higeon Sila.
Ah, yes. The musical pause.
Keil indicates this would have been a swelling solo of stringed instruments. I want you, the listener, to visualize this moment in the ancient temple.
It must have been breathtaking.
The massive choir has just sung about the poetic justice of the wicked falling into their own traps, and then the voices drop out completely.
Total vocal silence.
Yeah. The stringed instruments just swell, soaring aloft to a climax of triumph. Gives the congregation time to stand there and let the reality of that perfect justice sink in without any words getting in the way.
After that swelling crescendo fades, the music settles down for the Yod and Kos strophes in verses 18 through 21.
The tone shifts again here, doesn't it?
It does. The text shifts its gaze from the present victory to contemplating the absolute certainty of the future. The wicked must return to Sheol, while the needy, the Ebion, will not be forgotten.
Returning to Sheol.
Keil is very precise about what this return to Sheol means philosophically. He defines it as a reduction to dust, a reverting to atoms.
Reverting to atoms. That is a heavy way to phrase it.
Man was originally formed from the dust, and this judgment is the literal undoing of creation for those who forget God.
The text specifically labels the wicked as those who forget God, but I imagine someone listening might say, is forgetting really a crime worthy of uncreation? We all forget things.
That is a vital distinction to make. Keil argues that this forgetfulness is not a passive, innocent lapse of memory.
It is not just misplacing your keys.
No, it is not absent-mindedness. It is a guilty alienation. God has not left the nations without a witness of himself in creation and conscience.
Right, the evidence is there.
Therefore, their alienation is a deliberate turning away. An active suppression of the truth, a willful forgetting of the righteous judge so they can pursue their own autonomy.
We see a very specific word used for humanity here in verse 20, enosh. Break that down for us, because it highlights the absurdity of their defiance.
Enosh designates man specifically in his impotence, his sickness, and his frailty.
So it emphasizes how weak we are.
Yes, it stands in stark contrast to the omnipotence of God. Yet, despite being Enosh, despite being frail, mortal, prone to disease, and completely dependent on God for every breath, this creature acts defiant.
The sheer arrogance of it.
Exactly. He struts around the table, the globe, as if he possesses independent sovereign authority.
Which leads to the final brilliant petition of the psalm. David looks at this defiant, strutting humanity and asks God to lay Mora on them. What is Mora?
Mora is often translated simply as fear or terror, but Keil clarifies that it is not just random, chaotic panic.
It has a specific purpose.
He describes it as a lever of fear. David is praying for a mechanism of dismay, a divine reality check.
A lever to wake them up.
Yes, he wants God to apply a lever that forces defiant humanity to suddenly realize they are merely mortal, that they are Enosh.
I picture it like the sudden jolt of adrenaline you get when you step onto black ice.
Oh, that is a visceral image.
You are walking along, feeling confident,
Yeah.
completely in control of your trajectory, and suddenly your foot slips.
And your heart drops.
In a fraction of a second, your heart leaps into your throat, and you are instantly made to realize gravity and your own physical frailty. That slip is a lever of fear that instantly humbles your stride.
It snaps you back to reality.
David is praying for God to put black ice under the feet of the arrogant nations, forcing them to remember they are just dust.
That physical analogy captures the essence of Mora perfectly. The structure of the psalm moves the reader from a specific historical victory all the way to this universal condition of mankind standing before a sovereign God in desperate need of a lever to wake them up.
Let's track the thematic arc we have covered today. We started with the missing melody, realizing we shouldn't overcomplicate simple practicalities hunting for hidden codes.
Right, Mr. Greensleeves.
Yeah, exactly. We saw the architectural brilliance of the acrostic form, designed to make rigorous theological truths accessible to the everyday mind for memorization.
The many-celled casket.
We confronted the absolute erasure of the wicked and the terrifying uprooting of their very memory. We learned to find refuge in the high stronghold, the misgab, when all earthly exits are barricaded, discovering that true humility is forged in the painful school of affliction.
Which is a tough but necessary lesson.
And finally, we saw the stark reality check of human frailty before the righteous judge of the fertile earth.
The commentary forces us to reckon with a God who is both absolute in his justice and intimate in his care for the lowly.
So here is a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as we close. If alienation from God is defined in this text as a guilty forgetfulness, an active turning away from the witness he has provided, what daily habits, media diets, or cultural norms are quietly acting as a lever of forgetting in your life right now?
That is a very convicting question.
What is actively working against that sudden lever of fear that brings true, sobering perspective about our own frailty and God's absolute sovereignty? That is the question the text leaves hanging in the air for all of us. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep thinking critically.